welcome to the Deep Dive. You guys sent in some really interesting stuff, and today we're going to take a deep dive into those excerpts from Telltale by Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Sounds good.
This book really kind of makes you rethink some familiar figures in the Quran.
It does.
And lineages and all that.
Yeah, Dr. Waleed looks closely at the language of the Quran.
Okay.
And the order of the names mentioned to encourage a deeper understanding of the text.
I see.
Kind of independent of just the inherited interpretations that we get.
Yeah, one of the things that jumped out at me right away was this whole idea of divine selection.
Right.
And how that shapes the lineage of faith in Islam.
Yeah, that's definitely a core concept that Dr. Waleed is working with here.
Okay.
He highlights this idea of like a symbolic family tree of faith. So Adam is the root. Noah's the trunk, Abraham's family branches out from there, and the family of Imran is like the fruit.
So it sounds like he's taking this traditional idea of the lineage of prophets and adding his own spin to it.
Exactly.
What's unique about his take on this?
Well, what's really interesting is how Dr. Waleed emphasizes the symbolism of each figure. He's not just like listing names,
right,
you know?
Right.
He's showing how each one represents a specific stage in the development and transmission of faith.
I see. So it's not just about bloodlines. It's about a spiritual legacy being passed down through these key figures.
Yeah, and this brings us to another fascinating point that Dr. Waleed brings up.
Yep.
He talks about a detached prophet.
Okay.
So someone who received divine knowledge but went astray.
Hold on, wait. Are you saying there's a prophet mentioned in the Quran who, like, turned away from God?
That's exactly what Dr. Waleed is saying, yeah.
Wow.
He points to these verses that describe a prophet who was given, you know, God's verses.
Okay.
But chose to follow Satan instead.
Oh, wow.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He suggests that this figure, who he thinks might be named Israel, might not actually be Jacob like we traditionally understand.
Wait, Israel isn't Jacob. I mean, that's like Islamic History 101.
Right.
Yeah, it is. That's like the common understanding. But Dr. Waleed's argument is that the Quran never explicitly states that Israel is another name for Jacob. That mainly comes from interpretations and, you know, outside sources outside of the Quran.
So if Israel isn't Jacob, then who are the children of Israel in this context?
He suggests that they represent those who follow the path of this detached prophet.
Okay.
So it symbolizes this idea of straying from God's guidance.
Okay.
And that's a really powerful interpretation because it changes how we understand certain verses about the children of Israel.
This is making me rethink like everything I thought I knew.
Right.
It sounds like Dr. Waleed is challenging some pretty fundamental assumptions here about some of these core figures.
He is. And there's another layer to his analysis that I think you'll find really fascinating.
Okay.
He makes a really important distinction between the words parent and father.
Parent and father. Aren't those basically the same thing?
Not according to Dr. Waleed.
He argues that parent refers strictly to biological lineage, whereas father emphasizes the role of guidance and nurturing.
I see.
And he points out that the Quran never actually uses the term parent when talking about Jacob in relation to his children-only father.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So he's suggesting that Jacob's connection to the children of Israel might not be about direct descent, but more about spiritual guidance.
Exactly. And he even points out that the name Jacob itself could mean he who has no progeny, which would further support this idea.
So we're not talking about a traditional family tree here, but more of a spiritual lineage.
Exactly.
That's a pretty bold reinterpretation.
It is, and it leads us to another really crucial element of Dr. Waleed's analysis. And that is the concept of tribes in the Quran.
Okay, let's dive into that. How does this concept of tribes add to the discussion?
So Dr. Waleed shows how the term tribes is used in different ways throughout the Quran. And its meaning can change depending on the context of the verse.
So sometimes it refers to literal descendants.
Right.
But other times it has like a broader meaning.
Exactly. So for instance, in Surah Al-Baqarah, tribes seems to encompass a wider group. Potentially including descendants of both Jacob and his brother Ishmael.
I see.
But then in Surah Al-Araf, it takes on a different meaning. Referring to the children of Israel being divided into 12 nations. Or groups during the time of Moses.
So it's more about social and political divisions.
Right.
Rather than strict family ties.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then in Surah Al-Ma'idah, The focus is on the appointment of 12 leaders from among the children of Israel.
Okay.
Which again suggests like a system of organization
I see.
that goes beyond just family connections.
This is making me rethink this whole concept of children of Israel.
Right.
It's a lot more complex than just being, direct descendants of Jacob.
It is.
Yeah.
He challenges that simple notion, and he paints a picture of this diverse group with evolving social structures and internal divisions, not just this homogenous group defined by their lineage.
This is seriously blowing my mind.
I know, it's good stuff, right?
Yeah, we're talking about like a potentially massive shift in how we understand this part of the Quranic narrative.
Right.
Makes you wonder, what implications this has for understanding historical claims and justifications based on lineage.
You're right. That's a huge question.
Yeah.
And one that Dr. Waleed tackles head on, and that's exactly where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, now I'm really intrigued.
It's going to be good.
Don't go anywhere, listeners. We'll be back in a flash to unpack even more of Dr. Waleed's thought-provoking analysis.
Sounds good. Welcome back. We've been exploring some pretty fascinating stuff from Dr. Waleed's book.
Yeah.
And, as you mentioned, his ideas have some pretty big implications when we think about those historical claims based on lineage.
Right, like those groups who claim special privileges or try to justify their actions based on being the chosen people.
Right.
Or direct descendants of prophets.
Exactly.
Does Dr. Waleed address that?
He does, and his analysis really kind of throws a wrench in those kinds of arguments. I mean, if the children of Israel aren't necessarily, direct descendants of Jacob, as he suggests, then that whole claim to be a chosen people based solely on lineage starts to fall apart.
Right. And then if you add in Dr. Waleed's idea that, Israel might represent someone who strayed from God's path,
right,
it gets even more complicated.
Exactly. Those who claim to be his children, in that symbolic sense, might actually be perpetuating that deviation, not upholding some kind of special status.
Okay, so what's the alternative then?
Yeah.
If chosenness isn't about bloodlines, what is it about, according to Dr. Waleed?
It's about righteousness.
Okay.
Plain and simple, living in accordance with God's will, regardless of your ancestry. He's shifting the focus away from this kind of inherited privilege and towards individual responsibility and action.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about who you're related to.
Exactly. And that idea really aligns with the Quran's emphasis on, personal accountability.
Right.
Anyone, regardless of their lineage, can earn God's favor by striving to live a righteous life.
It's really striking how Dr. Waleed's work encourages us to think critically about the Quran.
Yeah.
Like, he's not just presenting these reinterpretations as facts.
Right.
He's inviting us to, engage with the text ourselves and question those traditional interpretations that we've maybe always accepted.
That's so important. We can't just blindly accept what you've been told.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something as complex and significant as the Quran.
Right.
We need to engage with the text directly, use our own reason and, critical thinking skills to really understand it.
So it's not just about reading the words, it's about grappling with their deeper meanings.
Exactly.
And considering different perspectives and, allowing our understanding to maybe change over time.
Absolutely. And that process of discovery is what makes studying the Quran so enriching. It's a living text that continues to speak to us across time and cultures.
Yep.
And every reading can reveal new insights and deepen our understanding.
I think that's a valuable takeaway for our listeners, too.
Definitely.
Don't be afraid to challenge assumptions.
Yeah.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Look for deeper layers of meaning in the text.
Right. And this brings us back to something we touched on earlier.
Okay.
Dr. Waleed's focus on those symbolic meanings of names in the Quran.
Yeah.
He's encouraging us to look beyond just the literal and consider the deeper significance they hold within the broader narrative.
Like with Israel and the children of Israel.
Exactly.
He's not just talking about individuals. He's using those names to represent bigger concepts and patterns of behavior.
Exactly. Israel becomes this symbol of deviation. And the children of Israel represent those who follow that path. And we see that same symbolic approach with other names, too.
Like Jacob.
Yes.
I remember you were saying that Dr. Waleed connects his name to the idea of spiritual lineage rather than biological descent.
Exactly. That meaning of Jacob as he who has no progeny could symbolize that shift from physical inheritance to a legacy of faith and guidance.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
It's really eye-opening to see how much we miss.
Right.
When we just stick to those literal interpretations.
Yeah.
Dr. Waleed is showing us a whole new way to read and understand the Quran.
I think he'd agree with that. He's not trying to replace traditional interpretations, but to offer a different lens through which we can engage with the text and discover new meanings.
And one of the things he emphasizes is the importance of recitation.
Yes.
Like going beyond just reading the words on the page.
That's right. He believes recitation is this transformative act.
Okay.
It's about connecting with the Quran on an intellectual, spiritual, and emotional level.
So it's about experiencing the Quran, not just studying it.
Precisely.
Okay.
And it's a reminder that true understanding comes from active engagement, not passive acceptance. So Dr. Waleed's calling for a more dynamic and personal relationship with the text.
And that's what's been so fascinating about this deep dive.
It's good stuff.
It's not just about learning facts. It's about questioning, exploring, uncovering new layers of meaning.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah, it's about embracing the Quran's richness and, letting it speak to us in new and unexpected ways.
Exactly.
We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
But there's still more to uncover.
Yeah.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll get into the specifics of some of those key verses.
Yeah.
And see how Dr. Waleed's analysis sheds light on the Quran's core message.
I'm looking forward to it. There are some really illuminating examples.
Awesome. So don't go anywhere, listeners.
Stick around.
We're about to take you even deeper into the heart of Dr. Waleed's thought-provoking analysis. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're wrapping up our exploration of Dr. Khaled Waleed's telltale.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to see how his ideas actually play out in specific verses of the Quran.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to see how everything we've talked about kind of comes together when we look at those actual verses.
Okay.
Like his distinctions between parent and father and, his analysis of tribes.
Right.
It really changes how we understand certain passages.
So which verses are particularly eye-opening through this lens?
Well, one that really stands out is from Surah Al-Isra.
Okay.
It says, "And we decreed to the children of Israel in the scripture that you would surely cause corruption upon the earth twice, and you would surely reach a degree of great arrogance." Now, this verse takes on a whole new meaning when we consider Dr. Waleed's interpretation of children of Israel.
You mean thinking of them as those who follow the path of that detached prophet?
Right.
Potentially named Israel? Yeah. Rather than just Jacob's descendants.
Exactly. Suddenly, it's less about a specific bloodline.
Okay.
And more about a pattern of behavior.
Okay.
A tendency towards corruption and arrogance that can pop up anywhere. Right. In any group that strays from God's path.
So a warning that applies to everyone, not just this particular group of people.
Exactly. It becomes a universal cautionary tale.
Okay.
About what happens when pride and corruption take root.
I see.
And it reinforces this idea that true chosenness, if you will, is about aligning yourself with God's will, not about claiming a special lineage.
That makes the idea of being chosen much more accessible.
Yeah.
It's about personal action and righteousness.
Right. It democratizes the concept, makes it relevant to everyone, regardless of their background.
Yeah. And there's another verse in Surah Al-Imran that I think further supports this idea.
Okay.
It describes how Israel made certain foods unlawful.
Right.
Before the Torah was revealed.
Right.
Essentially imposing his own restrictions, beyond what God had ordained.
Yeah, it totally ties in with that idea of the detached prophet.
Right.
Going his own way, even contradicting divine guidance.
And when we read that verse alongside the one from Surah Al-Isra, it paints a pretty clear picture of, a group prone to arrogance and straying from the right path.
Exactly.
I'm seeing how all the pieces of Dr. Waleed's argument are fitting together.
Right.
The detached prophet, parent versus father.
It's all connected.
The nuanced understanding of tribes. It's all connected.
It really is. And it's a testament to his, close reading of the Quran.
Right.
And his willingness to kind of think differently. He's showing us that we don't have to be bound by those traditional interpretations.
Right.
We can engage with the text ourselves and draw our own conclusions.
This deep dive has been a real mind bender in a good way.
It is good stuff.
Yeah, it challenged a lot of assumptions I had about the Quran, and it's left me wanting to learn more.
That's the beauty of engaging with scholarship, like Dr. Waleed's, It sparks curiosity.
Yeah.
It opens up new avenues for exploration and reminds us that the Quran is a living text, full of layers of meaning waiting to be discovered.
So for our listeners who are now all fired up
Yeah.
and ready to dive into the Quran themselves, what's the most important thing they should keep in mind?
I would say approach the text with an open mind and a critical eye.
Okay.
Question those inherited interpretations, explore alternative perspectives, and most importantly, engage directly with the Qur'an's words.
Okay.
Let them resonate within you and see what insights emerge.
That's great advice. And honestly, I think that applies to so much more than just reading the Quran.
Totally.
It's about being an active learner in all aspects of life.
I agree.
Question, explore, and never stop seeking deeper understanding.
Well said.
And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
It's been fun.
We hope this exploration of Dr. Waleed's Telltale has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue your own journey of discovery within the Quran. Until next time, keep those minds engaged and keep diving deep